at 9:01 p.m. Every Sunday, my parents' rent request would arrive, a punctual family ritual. My younger sister always paid with a charming smile. Her dues waived because family doesn't need invoices. The night my annual bonus hit my account, their text was blunt. Don't be late, but on Monday morning, I held the keys to their house. As of last week, the property was mine. My name is Tess Rowan, and I am 31 years old. I live in Glenford Springs, a city that prides itself on its quaint, tree-lined streets and a sense of enduring community. For me, community was measured in digital transactions. Every Sunday, at precisely 9:01 p.m., my phone would vibrate with a notification from a payment app. The sender was my father. The memo line never changed. Rent, Rowan residence. It was as reliable as the old bell in the town square, a chime that signaled the end of my weekend and the beginning of my obligation. I always paid it on the spot. A few taps, a confirmation screen, and the money was gone. It was a clean, sterile process that defined my relationship with the people who raised me. I was a tenant in the house I grew up in, a paying customer of the family unit. My sister, Kara, who is 27, had a different arrangement. She was exempt. The official reason, a line delivered by our mother with a patient sigh, was that Kara was launching her art startup. This startup consisted of an Instagram account where she posted photos of watercolors she occasionally painted, interspersed with a curated feed of her life, a life funded by an invisible, bottomless trust. Kara paid her rent in smiles and breezy anecdotes about her creative process. "Family doesn't need invoices," she'd say, and my parents would nod, their faces soft with admiration. Our mailboxes told the story better than any words could. Mine was a graveyard of corporate envelopes and stark white receipts, bank statements, utility bills. I was expected to split, and the monthly confirmation of my rent payment. It was a paper trail of my existence as a responsible adult. Kara's mailbox, just beside mine, was a constant festival. It overflowed with thick cream-colored invitations to gallery openings, birthday cards with glitter that spilled onto the flagstones, and delivery confirmations for flowers and gift baskets sent by her ever-growing circle of admirers. She received gifts for existing. I received invoices for the same privilege. The house itself ran on a set of unspoken rigid rules my parents called discipline. Dinner was served at 7:00 p.m. sharp, not 7:01, not 6:59. At the table, all phones were to be placed screen down. Silent black rectangles of submission. Conversation was sparse, functional. If a topic veered into something uncomfortable or, God forbid, emotional, my father would gently tap his fork against his plate. It wasn't a loud sound, but it sliced through the room with the finality of a gavel. The tap meant, end of discussion. Silence now. It was the sound of my childhood. Every attempt I ever made to question the system, to ask why my financial obligations were so different from Kara's, was met with the same placid, infuriating response from my mother. "You should be grateful, Tess. We're teaching you how to be an adult." It was their ultimate defense, a shield of parental wisdom that deflected all logic. Adulthood, in their definition, was the quiet acceptance of unfairness. My adulthood was confined to the attic. I paid for a small, stifling room at the top of the house, where the summer heat was unbearable and the winter drafts were sharp. The ceiling sloped aggressively, forcing me to stoop in half the room. It was my designated space, the box I paid to occupy. Kara, meanwhile, resided in the master suite on the second floor. It was the largest bedroom, complete with an ensuite bathroom and a walk-in closet. The justification for this arrangement was that Kara needed the space to heal. Heal from what? No one ever specified. It was a vague, all-encompassing term that granted her access to every comfort the house had to offer. She was a delicate artist in need of restoration. I was the sturdy, reliable daughter who could be stored in the attic. This dynamic extended seamlessly into our professional lives. The family company, Rowan Metrics, was a mid-sized data analysis firm my father had built from the ground up. I worked there as a senior project manager. Handling complex contracts and ensuring our deliverables were met on time and under budget, I was good at my job. I was meticulous, efficient, and invisible. Kara also worked at Rowan Metrics. Her title was Chief Experience Officer, a position our mother had invented and lobbied for. A new desk, an ergonomic chair, and a top-of-the-line iMac had appeared in a corner office one Monday, and Kara's nameplate was on the door by Tuesday. Her primary responsibility seemed to be ensuring the office had fresh flowers and that the corporate social media accounts were updated with inspirational quotes. The disparity was never more apparent than during our quarterly reviews. I would present a detailed breakdown of a multi-million-dollar contract I had secured, outlining the precise methodologies and risk assessments that had led to our success. My father would nod, grunt a perfunctory, "Good work," and move on. Then, Kara would present a slideshow of potential color palettes for the company's new branding initiative. She'd use words like synergy, vibrancy, and authenticity. At the end of her presentation, my mother would clap softly and say, "That's so inspiring, dear. You have such a wonderful eye." My father would beam, adding, "This is the kind of forward thinking we need." I brought in the money that kept the lights on. Kara was praised for suggesting we change the light bulbs to a warmer hue. I was the engine, greasy and functional, hidden under the hood. She was the gleaming, polished hood ornament, admired by all. The breaking point, like most fractures, started with a small, almost insignificant stressor. Kara had decided her art startup needed a video component. She began hosting live streams from her master suite studio. She bought professional lighting, a high-definition camera, and a backdrop. For hours, she would broadcast herself painting, talking to her followers, and reviewing art supplies. It was, by all accounts, a successful pivot. Her follower count swelled. The problem was, so did the electricity bill, the professional lights, the constantly running computer, the multiple devices all drew a tremendous amount of power. The utility bill for that month was nearly double the usual amount. I knew this because my father forwarded me the email from the power company. There was no text in the body of his email, just the forwarded message, with the bright orange Pay Now button prominently displayed. The implication was clear. I was expected to cover it, not split it, cover it. I stared at the screen, a cold, hard knot forming in my stomach. I looked at the detailed usage chart. The spike in consumption began exactly when Kara started her live streams. Her passion project, her brand, was being subsidized directly from my bank account, with my father acting as the silent, expectant broker. That was the night I stopped just feeling angry and started getting organized. I opened a new folder on my secure cloud drive. I labeled it Rowan Residence, Archive. I saved the forwarded electricity bill as a PDF. Then I went back. I screenshotted every single rent request from the payment app, dating back years. I downloaded my bank statements and highlighted each corresponding transfer. I found the email from my mother explaining that I would need to pay for the roof repair because it was good for my character. I found the text from my father asking for a short-term loan for the property taxes, a loan that was never repaid. I saved every email, every receipt, every dismissive text message. I scanned the physical receipts from the mailbox and uploaded them. The folder grew, document by document. It was a meticulous, detailed record of inequity. Each file was a small, sharp piece of evidence, a data point in a long, painful study. My parents had taught me the language of transactions. My father's company had taught me the power of data. I was simply applying my education. What I was building was not just a collection of grievances, it was a fortress, an arsenal, an emotional data archive, waiting for the right moment to be deployed. The world outside of my family operated on a different set of principles. It ran on logic, on process, and on the immutable truth of numbers on a spreadsheet. For the past 2 years, I had built my career inside that world. At a firm called Beacon Ledger Analytics, I was the lead of process control, a title that was as dry and precise as the work I did. My job was to audit corporate systems, identify inefficiencies, and ensure that every dollar a company spent was accounted for, categorized, and compliant with both internal policy and federal law, I was, in essence, a professional truth-teller. So, when Rowan Metrics signed a six-figure contract with Beacon Ledger to overhaul their internal financial systems, it felt like a tectonic plate shifting beneath my feet. My father, in a bid to modernize the company, had inadvertently hired his own daughter to scrutinize his operations. He didn't know the specifics of my role. He just knew I worked at the firm he'd hired. To him, it was a point of pride, a happy coincidence he could mention at board meetings. To me, it was the moment the universe finally handed me a key. I was not assigned to their account directly. That would be a conflict of interest. But my department oversaw all new client integrations, and as the lead, I had supervisory access to the entire data stream. I wasn't supposed to look, but the system didn't know we were family. The system only knew my clearance level. The initial phase was a full-spectrum diagnostic, a deep dive into years of spending. My team's software crawled through every digital nook and cranny of Rowan Metrics, flagging anomalies for review. My evenings became a quiet ritual of scrolling through endless lines of code, digital ledgers, and expense reports. It was a language I was fluent in, the cold, clean syntax of money moving from one account to another. Most of it was mundane: office supplies, software licenses, travel expenses, but my focus was on the discretionary spending of the senior management, a notorious gray area in any company, and especially in a family-run one. That's where I found the first crack. It was an invoice for over $20,000 from a high-end interior design firm. The expense had been coded to a new internal budget line item: Internal Content Studio, Setup. A photo studio wasn't an unusual expense for a company trying to build its brand, but when I clicked to view the attached purchase order, my breath caught in my throat. The recipient name listed on the invoice was not Rowan Metrics. The name was Kara Rowan. The shipping address was not the corporate office park. It was 14 Juniper Court, my home. They were using company money to furnish my sister's bedroom and calling it a content studio. The designer furniture, the custom shelving for her art supplies, the plush rug she bragged about on her live stream. It was all here, itemized and paid for by the company's shareholders. My training kicked in, a detached professionalism that felt like a shield. I flagged the transaction. I didn't add a comment. I just clicked the small orange triangle icon next to the line item, which designated it for manual review and required a justification from the approving manager. The system would handle the rest. 2 days later, I received a call from Arthur Vance, Rowan Metrics' long-serving head of legal. He was a man who had known me since I was a child, who had a permanent look of weary resignation. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "Tess, I saw a flag on a Q3 expense report. From your department. It's a routine audit. Arthur, the system flags expenses that lack proper documentation or seem to fall outside the approved budget code," I said, my voice even and calm. I was looking at the invoice on my screen as we spoke. There was a long pause. I could hear him sigh. A tired, heavy sound. "Listen to me. I'm saying this as an old friend. If it's a family company, you don't touch things like this. You see it, you unflag it, and you move on. Some numbers are not meant to be audited." The warning was clear. He was telling me to protect my family, to protect myself, to play by the unwritten rules I had spent my entire life trying to escape. The air in my office suddenly felt thin, but the sight of Kara's name on the invoice was a clarifying force, a single point of focus in a sea of emotional fog. "I touch numbers, Arthur," I replied, my voice colder than I intended. "Not people." I ended the call before he could respond. His warning had the opposite of its intended effect. It told me I was in the right place. It told me there was more to find. That night, I expanded my search parameters. I began looking at disbursements from accounts that were rarely scrutinized, like the Employee Welfare Fund. This was a fund designated for things like hardship assistance, educational grants, or small wellness initiatives. It was supposed to be a safety net for the rank-and-file employees. As I scrolled through the transaction history, One entry stood out. It was a recurring monthly payment, listed simply as auxiliary housing stipend. The amount was significant. It was also, to the exact dollar, the amount of the monthly mortgage payment for 14 Juniper Court. They were paying the mortgage on our family home out of the Employee Welfare Fund. My hands started to shake, a tremor of pure, unadulterated rage. This went beyond nepotism. This wasn't just buying furniture for the favored child. This was a flagrant misappropriation of funds. Money that could have helped an employee with medical bills or a family in crisis was instead being used to pay for my parents' house, the house they charged me rent to live in. I ran the transaction through the Beacon Ledger diagnostic suite. The system reacted instantly. A bright red box popped up on my screen, the digital equivalent of a blaring alarm. The text was stark, stripped of all ambiguity. Expenditure outside of stated business purpose, non-compliant with fund charter, significant audit risk. The machine saw the truth, even if the people involved chose to ignore it. The machine didn't care that they were my parents. It only cared about the rules. I drafted a memo. My fingers flew across the keyboard, my movements precise and economical. The subject line was neutral. Query regarding Employee Welfare Fund transaction. The body of the email was brief, containing only 2 sentences. During a routine system analysis, Alert 7B4 was triggered regarding a recurring monthly payment from the Employee Welfare Fund. The associated data extract is attached for your review. I attached the system-generated log file, a cold, factual stream of numbers and timestamps. I sent it to the general inboxes for the CFO and the head of HR at Rowan Metrics. I did not send it to my father. This was not personal. This was procedural. For 3 days, there was nothing. No email response, no official inquiry. The digital silence was a response in itself. They were hoping it would go away. They were hoping I would let it go. Then, on the 4th day, my phone rang. The caller ID was Mom. I let it ring twice before answering, taking a deep breath to steady my voice. Hello? Tess? Her voice was strained, wrapped in a layer of forced nonchalance. I just got off the phone with Arthur. He said you've been flagging some things at the office. The system has been flagging things, I corrected her. It's part of the diagnostic Beacon Ledger was hired to run. Don't be difficult, Tess, she said, her voice dropping the pretense of calm. You know what I mean. This housing stipend, the furniture, it's all just complicated paperwork. You don't need to make a big deal out of it. A big deal? They were stealing from their own employees, and she was dismissing it as a paperwork issue. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. I looked at the red alert box still open on my second monitor. Significant audit risk. The words felt like a lifeline, a solid piece of ground in the swirling chaos of her gaslighting. It's not my decision to make it a big deal or not, I said, and my voice was steady now, fortified by the certainty of the data. The numbers are what they are. This could cause a lot of trouble for your father, for Kara, she pressed, her voice taking on a pleading, guilt-laden edge. Is that what you want? I thought about the attic room. I thought about the electricity bill. I thought about a lifetime of invoices for a love that should have been free. I'm just doing my job, Mom. My mother's phone call did not frighten me. It focused me. The corporate malfeasance at Rowan Metrics was a symptom. The root of the disease was the house at 14 Juniper Court. The house had been transformed into a financial instrument they used to control me and subsidize my sister. The auxiliary housing stipend was more than just a fraudulent expense line. It was the key. It told me that for all their posturing about discipline and financial independence, my parents were vulnerable. So, I followed the money. That night, my work did not end when I logged out of the Beacon Ledger system. I logged into a different kind of database, one that was open to the public, the Glenford Springs County Property Records Portal. The website was clunky, a relic of early 2000s web design, but it was a repository of facts. In the search bar, I typed the address that had been the beginning and end of my entire world. The screen flickered, and the property details loaded. Owner, David and Eleanor Rowan. Assessed value, property tax history, and there, under the section marked Liens and Encumbrances, was the data I was looking for. There was the primary mortgage, a standard 30-year loan from a national bank, but below it was a second entry, a second mortgage, taken out 7 years ago. My eyes narrowed, the focus of my world shrinking to the pixels on the screen. A second mortgage is a sign of financial strain. It's a way to pull cash out of a home, but it comes at a higher cost. I clicked on the hyperlink, a string of numbers that represented the legal filing. The document was a scanned PDF, filled with dense, legal boilerplate. I read through it, my mind automatically parsing the jargon, and then I found the critical clause. It was an adjustable rate mortgage, an ARM. The initial low-interest period had expired 2 years ago, and it was now in its adjustment phase. The next rate recalculation was scheduled for the first of the following month, less than 4 weeks away. Given the current market, the interest rate was set to nearly double. I felt a cold surge of adrenaline. I scanned further, looking for the section on defaults. The terms were aggressive. If the borrower was late on a single payment after a rate adjustment, the lender had the right to accelerate the debt and initiate foreclosure proceedings. One missed payment. That was the trigger. The entire financial structure of my family was balanced on a knife's edge. My final piece of research for the night was the name of the lender. It wasn't a bank. It was an entity I'd never heard of. Halcyon Ridge Capital. A 10-minute search gave me everything I needed to know. Halcyon Ridge was what the industry politely calls a distressed asset fund. In plainer terms, they were vultures. They bought risky debts, like second mortgages on over-leveraged properties, from the original lenders for a fraction of their face value. Their business model was simple. Collect what you can, as aggressively as you can, and if the debt goes bad, foreclose and seize the asset. They were unsentimental. They were transactional. They were perfect. An idea began to form in my mind. It was a wild, audacious thought, but it wasn't born from rage. It was born from the same part of my brain that designed process control systems. It was a logistical solution to a systemic problem. I had been trying to appeal to a system of fairness that didn't exist in my family. I had been using words when they only understood the language of money and leverage. The audit at work was one form of leverage. This was another. This was bigger. What if I could control the debt itself? The next morning, I booked a 1-hour consultation with a financial attorney in the city, 2 towns over from Glenford Springs. I chose her from a list of top-rated lawyers, someone with no possible connection to my family's circle. I took the afternoon off work. I sat in a sterile, modern office, the air smelling of paper and ambition. I didn't give her my real name. I laid out the situation as a hypothetical. Let's say there is a piece of private, secondary mortgage debt on a residential property. I began, my voice a calm, even monotone. The debt is held by a small investment fund. If a private citizen wanted to acquire that debt, to become the new lender, is that legally possible? The lawyer, a sharp woman in her 50s, looked at me over her glasses. She didn't ask why. She simply considered the mechanics of the question. Possible? Absolutely, she said. These funds sell debt portfolios all the time. If you approach them to buy a single, specific note, they'll almost certainly listen. To them, it's just a line item on a spreadsheet. If you can offer them a clean, quick exit for a fair price, they'll take it. But you'll need 2 things. Which are? Cash, she said bluntly. You can't finance the purchase of a debt. You need the full amount liquid. And second, you'll want a corporate shield. You'll want to form an LLC, a limited liability company. It will be the legal entity that purchases and holds the debt. It anonymizes you and protects your personal assets. I felt a ghost of a smile touch my lips. An LLC, a corporate shield. It was the language of my world. Thank you, I said, sliding a prepaid debit card across the table to pay for her time. That's all I needed to know. The process of creating Juniper North LLC took less than 48 hours. It was all done online. A series of forms and filing fees. I named it after the street I lived on. a name that was both intimately connected to the target and completely anonymous. I was the sole member. For the official address, I rented a P.O. box at a mail center near the lawyer's office. Juniper North LLC existed only on paper, a digital ghost born for a single purpose. I then went to a different bank from the one I used personally and opened a business account in the LLC's name. I transferred a significant portion of my life savings into it, the money I had meticulously saved, year after year, even as I paid my parents for the privilege of living in their attic. With the entity created and the funds in place, it was time to make contact. I opened a new email account for Juniper North. The address was sterile. acquisitions@junipernorth.lc. I found the general contact email for Halcyon Ridge Capital. My message to them was a single sentence. To acquisitions@halcyonridge.com from acquisitions@junipernorth.com. Subject: Inquiry regarding note HR 7781. I am writing to express interest in acquiring the debt associated with note HR 7781 at a discounted rate. I stared at the words on the screen. It was the most significant declaration of my life, and it was cloaked in the blandest corporate jargon imaginable. I clicked send. The next 3 days were a masterclass in controlled anxiety. I went to work, I ran my diagnostics, I sat in meetings, but a part of my mind was constantly refreshing a phantom inbox, waiting for a reply. I felt like I had planted a seed and was now holding my breath, waiting to see if it would take root. The reply came on the 3rd day, late in the afternoon. It was from a man named Mark Trask, portfolio manager at Halcyon Ridge. His email was as devoid of pleasantries as mine had been. We can entertain an offer for note HR 7781. Our price is 62% of the outstanding principal balance. We would require a 10% deposit in escrow and for the transaction to close within 5 business days. Let me know if you wish to proceed. I read the email 3 times. 62 cents on the dollar. It was a steep discount, reflecting the risk of the loan and their desire to liquidate it before the rate adjustment potentially turned it into a protracted foreclosure battle. They wanted a quick, clean sale. They thought they were dealing with another faceless fund. They had no idea they were dealing with the girl who slept in the attic. I swiveled in my chair and opened my new business banking portal. My heart was beating a steady, heavy rhythm, like a drum counting cadence for a march. There was no fear. There was no hesitation. There was only the cold, clear certainty of the next step in the process. I initiated the wire transfer for the deposit, sending tens of thousands of dollars from the account of Juniper North LLC to the escrow agent Mark had specified. My hand did not shake as I clicked the final confirmation button. This move was not a declaration of war shouted from the rooftops. It was not a tearful confrontation in the living room. It was something quieter, colder, and far more binding. This was not a revenge that screamed. It was a revenge that whispered, with the scratch of a pen on a contract. The wire transfer cleared in 24 hours. The digital paperwork, a flurry of PDFs and e-signatures, was finalized by the end of the week. It all happened in the silent, invisible world of finance, a series of electrons rearranged to form a new reality. When it was done, a final confirmation email landed in Juniper North LLC's inbox. The subject line was simple: Transaction complete. Note HR 7781. And just like that, I was the legal holder of the second mortgage on my parents' house. The power had shifted, not with a bang, but with the quiet click of a mouse. My first act as the new creditor was not to send a letter demanding payment, but to exercise my right to protect the asset from the anonymous PMO box registered to Juniper North. I dispatched a formal, professionally worded letter to David and Eleanor Rowan at 14 Juniper Court. The letter informed them that, as part of the new creditor's due diligence, a complimentary home safety inspection would be conducted by a licensed third-party contractor. A date and time were provided. It was a request, but it was worded with the firm politeness of an action that could not be refused. The inspection company I hired was the best in Glenford Springs. The inspector, a man named Mr. Gable, was thorough and impartial. I received his full report the next day, complete with high-resolution photos. The findings were exactly what I expected from a house where appearances were valued more than substance. The wiring in the basement was frayed, a potential fire hazard. The banister on the main staircase was loose, its fixtures rusted, and the smoke detector in the upstairs hallway, the one right outside Kara's master suite, had an expired battery and failed its functionality test. It was a small thing, a $5 battery, but its absence was a perfect metaphor. The full report was printed on thick paper, bound in a professional folder, and mailed to my parents. The cover letter, again from Juniper North, was a masterpiece of detached concern. For the ongoing safety of the residents and the preservation of the asset's value, it read, "We recommend addressing the highlighted items at your earliest convenience. It was not a demand. It was not a threat. It was a recommendation, delivered with the cold, impersonal care of an insurance company. It was a whisper of liability, a suggestion that they were failing in their duties as homeowners." My next move was to address another clause in the loan agreement: the creditor's right to monitor the property's external condition and security. Another letter was sent. This one informed the residents of 14 Juniper Court that, as a security upgrade, the creditor would be installing a new smart doorbell system at no cost to them. The justification was simple: asset monitoring. The next afternoon, a technician in a van arrived and installed a state-of-the-art video doorbell. From an app on my phone, I now had a high-definition, time-stamped view of the front door. Every arrival, every departure, every delivery was logged. The crisp ding of the notification on my phone became a drumbeat, marking the rhythm of the house I was preparing to take. It was a constant, subtle reminder of my presence. I was the ghost in their machine. Kara, predictably, was the first to react. During one of her live streams, she launched into a dramatic monologue about a series of creepy and unsettling events. "It's so weird. You guys," she said, her eyes wide for the camera. "We've been getting these strange, formal letters from some company I've never heard of, and then yesterday, a guy just shows up and installs this new doorbell camera. It feels like someone is watching us." I watched the live stream from my laptop in the attic, the irony of physical weight in the room. In the background of her shot, I could see a corner of the new designer armchair that Rowan Metrics had paid for. "My parents say it's nothing, just some weird administrative thing," she continued, pouting. "They told me not to be so dramatic." They were blind. They saw the individual events, the letters, the inspection, the camera, but their pride and their complete inability to see me as anything other than their compliant, rent-paying daughter prevented them from connecting the dots. They couldn't imagine a world where they were not in control. Before proceeding, I extended one, final, calculated off-ramp. A final letter was sent from Juniper North LLC. The tone was markedly different. It was helpful, almost friendly. It acknowledged the upcoming interest rate adjustment and the potential for a significant payment increase. It then offered an opportunity to discuss a loan modification. "We believe in working with our clients to find sustainable financial solutions." It stated, "We are open to discussing a modest restructuring of the terms, including a fixed rate, in exchange for a transparent and automated payment schedule." It was a fair offer, a genuinely good deal. It was a chance for them to legitimize their debt, to treat it seriously, and to get out from under the looming rate hike. It was a test. For 10 days, there was only silence. The offer was met with the same dismissive void as my compliance memos at work. They did not call the phone number listed for Juniper North. They did not respond to the P.O. box. They simply ignored it. Then, on the last Sunday of the month, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was 9:01 p.m. I looked at the screen. It was the notification from the payment app. A request from my father. Memo. Rent. Rowan Residence. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. They were living in a fantasy, and they were trying to pull me back into it. In their world, they were the landlords. In the real world, the one made of legal documents and signed contracts, I was their creditor. They had failed the test. I took a screenshot of the rent request. I then opened the scanned PDF of the refinancing offer sent by Juniper North. I created a new document, placing the two images side by side. On the left, their demand for rent. On the right, my offer to restructure their mortgage. The contradiction was stark, brutal, and beautiful. I saved the file to my archive. File name, Dueling Realities, PDF. With all the pieces in place at home, I turned my attention to the office. My work at Beacon Ledger was the second front in this quiet war. I spent the week finalizing my official compliance report on Rowan metrics. The document was a monument to factual precision. It detailed the miscategorized expenses for the internal content studio. It laid out, with irrefutable data logs, the misappropriation of funds from the employee welfare account. There were no accusations, no emotional language, just a sterile presentation of the facts, supported by hundreds of pages of data appendices. It was unarguable. When I was finished, I locked the document with my digital signature, an encrypted, time-stamped seal that made it a final, official record. The endgame was approaching. All my preparations, personal and professional, were complete. All I needed was a venue. The email arrived on Wednesday afternoon. It was from my father's executive assistant. A mandatory meeting for the Rowan Metrics Board of Directors had been scheduled for Friday at 2 p.m. The agenda item was listed as Q3 Financial Review and Systems Modernization Update. The stage was set. The audience was confirmed. All my quiet, whispered moves, the legal filings, the doorbell dings, the professional memos, were about to crescendo into a single, inescapable conversation in a closed room. The boardroom at Rowan Metrics was a shrine to my father's ego. The table was a single, monolithic slab of polished mahogany. The chairs were black leather, high-backed and imposing. On the wall hung a commissioned oil painting of my father, looking stern and visionary. It was a room designed to project power and intimidate, but I was not intimidated. Data is the great equalizer. I sat on the periphery, my laptop closed, waiting. My father, David Rowan, sat at the head of the table. My mother, Eleanor, was to his right, a silent but powerful presence on the board. Kara was there, in her capacity as Chief Experience Officer, looking bored and scrolling through her phone under the table. The rest of the board consisted of two of my father's old colleagues and the chairman, a man named Marcus Sterling. Sterling was a retired titan of industry, a man with a reputation for sharp questions and zero tolerance for nonsense. He was the only one in the room I couldn't predict. "Finally," my father announced, his voice booming with false bonhomie. "We have a presentation from the team at Beacon Ledger Analytics on their systems modernization audit. Tess, why don't you come show us what you found?" He said my name as if presenting a prized horse. He had no idea he was inviting the executioner to the stage. I walked to the head of the table, my heels clicking softly on the marble floor. I connected my laptop to the projector, and the screen behind me flickered to life. My voice, when I spoke, was calm and measured, the voice of a consultant, not a daughter. "Good afternoon. My name is Tess Rowan, from Beacon Ledger Analytics. The following presentation is a summary of our initial diagnostic, focusing on identifying areas of what we call unintentional fiscal waste to improve process optimization." My parents relaxed visibly. The corporate jargon was a familiar lullaby. The first 3 slides were intentionally dense. They were filled with charts and industry benchmarks, speaking in a language of efficiency that was designed to be both impressive and slightly boring. I was setting the baseline. I was establishing my credibility as a detached professional. Then, I clicked to slide 4. The slide was stark white. On the left was a simple table with dates, purchase order numbers, and amounts. Under the heading, Expenditures, Budget Code 7G, Internal Content Studio. On the right was a collage of scanned documents, invoices from a high-end furniture store, shipping manifests, delivery confirmations. 2 pieces of information were highlighted in a calm, unobtrusive red box on every single document: the recipient name, Kara Rowan, and the delivery address, 14 Juniper Court. I said nothing. I simply stood there and let the silence stretch. It grew, filling the corners of the room, becoming heavy and suffocating. I saw Kara lean forward, squinting at the screen, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. My mother's smile became a rigid line. My father's face went blank with shock. It was Sterling who broke the silence. He didn't look at me. He looked at my father. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a razor. "Who approved these expenditures, David?" My father opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked to my mother, who was suddenly fascinated by a spot on the mahogany table. The two other board members shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs. The question hung in the air, an indictment. Before anyone could manufacture an answer, I clicked to the next slide. The heading read, Analysis of Employee Welfare Fund Disbursements, FY. The slide was dominated by a bar chart showing monthly payouts. One bar was a skyscraper next to the others, a recurring payment labeled Auxiliary Housing Stipend. Below the chart was a simple text box containing a direct quote from Rowan Metrics' own HR policy, defining the fund's sole purpose as providing assistance to employees in crisis. At the bottom of the slide, a single line of text in bold. Note: this recurring disbursement is in direct violation of stated company policy and the fund's legal charter. The air was sucked out of the room. This was not a procedural error. This was a potential crime. My mother, recovering first, deployed the family's go-to defense, minimization. She produced a short, brittle laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Oh, that," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "Heavens, that was just a simple accounting mix-up from years ago, a placeholder that was never corrected. We'll reimburse the fund immediately. Of course, it's a trivial matter." Trivial, the word twisted in my gut. I turned my head, breaking my presenter's stance for the first time. I looked past my parents, past the oil painting, and settled my gaze on my sister. She was looking down at her hands, her face flushed with shame. My voice was soft, almost conversational. "Have you reimbursed anything yet, Kara?" Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. The question was a scalpel, neatly separating her from our parents' protective shield. It demanded personal accountability. No, she stammered, looking to our mother for a lifeline. "I contribute in other ways, with my personal brand. The exposure I bring to the company is a significant asset." It was the most pathetic defense I had ever heard. It was the logic of a child in a boardroom of adults. Before I could respond, Marcus Sterling spoke again. His voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. He addressed Kara, but his words were a judgment on the entire family. "Personal brands do not pay invoices, Ms. Rowan." The finality in his tone was absolute. He had validated my data. He had shattered their narrative. In 2 short sentences, he had declared their way of operating to be illegitimate. My work here, as a consultant from Beacon Ledger, was done. With deliberate economical movements, I closed my laptop. The projector screen went black, returning the room to its somber, wood-paneled reality. The abrupt darkness made everyone flinch. I looked directly at the chairman. "That concludes the official presentation from Beacon Ledger Analytics," I said, my voice clear and formal. "However, there is one more matter. It is of a private and sensitive nature. I request the board's permission to present it after the conclusion of our scheduled agenda." My father's face was ashen. My mother stared at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of fury and fear. They knew. They didn't know how, but they knew this was about more than miscategorized furniture. This was about everything. The other board members exchanged nervous glances. Marcus Sterling held my gaze for a long moment. He saw the data I had presented. He saw my composure, and he saw the raw panic in the eyes of his CEO. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Permission granted," he said. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next blow to fall. The air in the boardroom was thick with unspoken questions. My father's face was a thundercloud of confusion and rage. My mother looked at me as if I were a stranger, a hostile operative who had somehow infiltrated her life. Marcus Sterling, the chairman, broke the silence, his voice a low rumble. "The board recognizes your request. Ms. Rowan, you have the floor." I gave a slight, formal nod. I did not return to the projector. This was not a presentation of data. This was a transfer of power. I walked to my chair, opened my leather briefcase, and retrieved a stack of thin, professionally bound documents. There were 7 of them. With a calm, deliberate pace, I walked around the polished mahogany table. I placed a copy in front of each board member. I placed one in front of my mother. Her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I placed one in front of Kara, who flinched as if the paper were hot. Finally, I placed one directly in front of my father. He stared at it, refusing to touch it, as if it were a serpent. I returned to my position at the head of the table and waited. The only sound in the room was the soft rustle of paper as the board members, led by Sterling, opened their copies. The cover page was stark. Printed in a simple, severe font, it read, "Notice of change in second mortgage holder. Property, 14 Juniper Court, Glenford Springs." I watched my mother's face. I saw her eyes scan the page, her brow furrowed in confusion. I saw the exact moment she processed the names. The original lender, Glenford Community Bank. The first assignee, Halcyon Ridge Capital. And then, the current holder, the new creditor, Juniper North LLC. Her lips, which had been pressed into a thin, angry line, went completely white. A small, almost inaudible gasp escaped her. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. Her voice was a dry whisper, a sound that barely carried across the table. Who is Juniper North?" I held her gaze. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply delivered the fact, my voice as neutral and steady as if I were reading a line from a report. "It's my company." For a single, silent moment, the statement hung in the air, incomprehensible. Then, the dam of my father's composure broke. He shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. He slammed his fist down on the mahogany table. The sound was like a gunshot, making everyone, including Sterling, jump. "You dare!" he roared, his face purple with rage. The carefully constructed facade of the powerful CEO had crumbled, revealing the sputtering, impotent fury of a man who had just lost control. "You dare to go behind our backs? To interfere in our private finances? After everything we have done for you?" The accusation was so deeply ironic it was almost laughable. Everything they had done for me. They had invoiced me for my childhood. They had charged me for my own existence. I did not raise my voice to match his. I let his echo fade into the stunned silence of the room, and then I answered. My words quiet, precise, and aimed at the heart of the matter. "I bought the debt," I said, looking from his furious face to my mother's pale one. "I did not buy affection, but it seems that our family has been taught to only accept the language of invoices. So, I am speaking to you in the only language you seem to respect." My father was speechless, his mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. He looked to Arthur Vance, the company's legal counsel, for support. This is illegal. She can't do this." I turned my gaze to Arthur. He had been flipping through the document, his face grim. "Arthur," I said calmly, "would you please confirm for the board that the transfer of debt, as documented, is legally binding and has been correctly filed with the county clerk's office?" Arthur swallowed hard, avoiding my parents' desperate eyes. He was their lawyer, but he was also an officer of the court. He cleared his throat. The documents appear to be in perfect order," he conceded, his voice heavy with resignation. "The assignment of debt is valid. The filings are correct. Juniper North LLC is the legal second lien holder." The words settled over my parents like a shroud. It was real. It was irreversible. I was now in control. "If you would all please turn to the final page," I said, my voice still even, still professional. You will find a schedule of required actions. With trembling fingers, my mother turned the page. My father remained standing, glaring at me, but I saw his eyes drop to read the document in front of him. The final page was not a request. It was a list of directives. First, I stated, narrating the points on the page, a licensed and bonded contractor will be scheduled within 10 days to remedy the safety violations identified in the third-party inspection report, specifically the faulty wiring and the broken smoke detector. The cost will be billed to the homeowners. Second, a new monthly payment schedule for the second mortgage will commence on the 1st of next month. The payment will be made via automated transfer to the account listed for Juniper North LLC. The amount reflects the interest rate adjustment as stipulated in the original loan agreement. I paused, letting the weight of that sink in. Their mortgage payment was now my income. Finally, I continued, the homeowners have the option to seek refinancing from another financial institution to buy out Juniper North's position. We would, of course, cooperate fully with any such transaction. I didn't need to state the alternative. The document did it for me. In cold legal terms, it spoke of default, of acceleration clauses, and of the creditor's right to initiate foreclosure proceedings to recover the asset. I did not need to threaten to take their house. The contract they had signed years ago was now threatening them for me. The words on the page were louder than my father's roar had ever been. Through the entire exchange, Kara had been silent, her face a mask of disbelief. She looked from my face to our parents' faces, as if trying to understand the new language being spoken. Now, she finally found her voice. It was a whisper, filled with a genuine, wounded confusion. You did this for revenge? I looked at my sister, the girl who lived in the master suite, to heal, the one who paid for her life with smiles while I paid with cash, the one for whom all of this had been done, and the one who had never once questioned the fundamental unfairness of it all. My anger was not for her. Not really. It was for the system that created her. But my answer had to be for her. It had to be the truth. No, I said, and then I clarified. I did this to stop you from living for free on my money. The mahogany table was no longer a symbol of my father's power. It was a bargaining table where he held no chips. The silence in the room was a heavy, weighted blanket, smothering the last embers of their authority. My father, still standing, looked deflated, a man whose reality had been rewritten without his consent. I am now going to present you with your options, I said, my voice cutting through the tension. I was no longer addressing just my parents, but the entire board. This was now a matter of corporate governance as much as it was a family dispute. There are 3 paths forward concerning the asset at 14 Juniper Court. I held up a single finger. Option 1. Refinance. You secure a new loan from a traditional lender, buy out Juniper North's position, and satisfy the full outstanding debt. The slate is wiped clean. You would, of course, need to meet the standard requirements of financial transparency and creditworthiness. I let that last part hang in the air, knowing full well their recent activities would make that difficult. I held up a second finger. Option 2. Sell the property. You put the house on the market. The proceeds will be used to pay off the primary mortgage and then the secondary mortgage held by my company. Any remaining equity is yours. It's a clean break. Finally, I held up a third finger, the final option, the one I had designed for this moment. Option 3. A deed in lieu of foreclosure. You voluntarily transfer the title and ownership of the property to Juniper North LLC. This avoids a foreclosure on your credit record. My company takes possession of the asset, and the debt is considered settled. My father finally spoke, his voice a hoarse rasp. He wasn't yelling anymore. He was pleading, grasping for the one defense he had always used. Tess, stop this. We're family. The word hung in the room, a hollow, meaningless token. I met his desperate gaze with a look of cold, hard clarity. Family, I responded, my voice level, is not a financial instrument to be used to waive invoices or forgive debts. You taught me that. You taught me that with every rent request you ever sent. Marcus Sterling, the chairman, cleared his throat. He looked from my parents' shattered faces to my own implacable one. "Perhaps," he suggested, his tone a cautious attempt at mediation, "we should adjourn for a brief recess to allow the family to discuss this privately." "That won't be necessary, Mr. Chairman," I said immediately, my voice sharp and decisive. My authority in the room was now absolute, because I have not yet finished outlining the terms of option 3. A ripple of confusion went through the room. I had their complete, undivided attention. I had laid out the ruthless, logical choices. Now, I was going to introduce the human element, not as a weakness, but as a scalpel. "There is an additional clause," I announced. "If, and only if, you select option 3, the voluntary transfer of ownership, I am prepared to offer the following. First, Juniper North LLC will forgive the entirety of the accrued and unpaid interest on the loan. The debt will be settled for the principal amount only." I saw Arthur Vance's eyebrows shoot up. It was a significant financial concession. "Second," I continued, "I will grant you a 60-day rent-free leaseback agreement. You will have 2 full months to reside in the house and make arrangements to move, at no cost. You will be guests, not tenants." A murmur went through the room. This wasn't the act of a vengeful creditor. This was something else, something harder to define. It was a move that was both generous and devastatingly final. My mother looked at me, a flicker of hope in her eyes, thinking, perhaps, that this was an olive branch, a return to the old ways. But it came with a price. "This offer of leniency," I said, my voice hardening again, "is contingent on 2 non-negotiable conditions." I turned my gaze to my parents. "Condition 1. You will both sign a legally binding addendum to your board member agreements, drafted by Mr. Vance, explicitly forbidding the use of any corporate funds, accounts, or assets for personal expenses of any kind. Effective immediately, any violation will trigger an automatic termination for cause." I then shifted my gaze to my sister, Kara, who had been watching this all unfold like a tennis match, flinched as if I had struck her. "Condition 2. Kara Rowan will tender her resignation from the position of Chief Experience Officer, also effective immediately. She will vacate her office by the end of the day." The room erupted in a low buzz of whispers. I had just linked the fate of their home directly to the corporate corruption I had exposed. I was not just taking the house, I was cleaning it. I was severing the toxic connection that had allowed my sister's lifestyle to be funded by both my personal income and the company's coffers. Arthur Vance, the lawyer, was staring at the proposal I had laid out. I could see the wheels turning in his legal mind. He leaned over to one of the other board members and whispered, his voice just loud enough for me to hear, "My God, it's an uncomfortably fair agreement." He was right. It wasn't an act of pure revenge. It was an act of pure justice. I wasn't leaving them homeless and destitute. I was offering them a clean, dignified exit from the financial mess they had created. All I was asking for in return was accountability, an end to the game. My mother found her voice again. It was shaking, fragile. And if we refuse? If we don't agree to these conditions?" I looked at her, and for the first time, I felt a sliver of something that might have been pity, but it was not enough to change my course. I had come too far. The system was too broken. "If you do not accept one of these 3 options by the end of this meeting," I stated, my voice leaving no room for negotiation, "then my answer is simple. The foreclosure proceedings will be filed with the court by my attorney first thing on Monday morning." The finality of the statement landed with a thud. Monday morning, it was a deadline, a point of no return. In that moment, Kara looked at me. It was a look I had never seen from her before, for her entire life. She had looked at me with the casual condescension of the favored child. She had seen me as the boring, practical, uninspired older sister, the utility, the ATM, but now she was looking at me as an equal, as an adult, a formidable one. She saw the years of quiet observation, of meticulous record-keeping, of suppressed anger that had been forged into this unbreakable plan. She finally saw me. The only sound in the boardroom was the low, persistent hiss of the air conditioning vent above the table. It was a sound that had always been there, a white noise I had never noticed until this moment, where it seemed to amplify the profound, suffocating silence. No one moved. My ultimatum, my 3 doors, had sealed the exits. Now, all that was left was the choice. Arthur Vance, seeing the stalemate, quietly separated the signature pages for option 3 from the main document. He slid one copy in front of my father, another in front of my mother. He then slid a blank sheet of corporate letterhead in front of Kara. He did it all with the quiet efficiency of an undertaker preparing a body for viewing. My father stared at the page. The pen, a heavy gold-plated instrument he had received for his 20th year as CEO, lay beside it. His world, the empire of Rowan Metrics and the kingdom of 14 Juniper Court, had been reduced to a single, empty line on a piece of paper. His hand, which had once signed million-dollar contracts with a confident flourish, trembled as it reached for the pen. He picked it up. His knuckles were white. He held it poised over the signature line, the nib hovering a millimeter above the paper. A single bead of sweat formed on the bridge of his nose, caught the overhead light, and glistened like a tear. He could not bring himself to make the mark, to sign away his home, his authority, his pride. It was my mother who broke the spell. She wasn't looking at the papers. She was looking at me. Her expression stripped of all its usual defenses, the condescension, the maternal wisdom, the disappointment. All that was left was a raw, pleading vulnerability. Her voice was thin, almost lost in the hum of the room. "Do you hate us, Tess?" The question was a last, desperate attempt to find the emotional lever, to turn this back into a family drama instead of a corporate takeover. But the lever was broken. I had spent years dismantling it. I met her gaze without flinching, and my answer was not born of the rage of the last few weeks, but of the quiet, accumulated pain of a lifetime. "No," I said, and my voice was surprisingly gentle. "I hate what you taught me. I hate that you taught me love comes with an invoice." The words landed in the room with no force, yet they seemed to shake its very foundations. It was the truth, distilled into a single sentence. It was the thesis of my entire existence in their world. And it was that sentence that finally broke Kara. A sob escaped her lips, a choked, ragged sound. It wasn't the performative pout of her live streams. It was a sound of genuine, gut-wrenching shame. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her carefully applied makeup. She looked at me. Her eyes filled with a dawning comprehension, as if she were seeing the last 27 years of her life through a different lens. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "I'm so sorry I took the master bedroom." It was such a small, specific apology. It wasn't about the money, or the furniture, or her fake job. It was about the room, the space she had occupied so effortlessly while I was relegated to the attic. It was an admission of the fundamental inequity, the first she had ever made, a confession that was as heavy and solid as a vault. I reached into my briefcase one last time. I pulled out a single sheet of paper and slid it across the polished table. It slid to a stop between my father's and mother's documents. It was the rent request from the previous Sunday, the one I had saved as a PDF and printed out that morning. The familiar, hated memo line was stark against the white paper. Rent, Rowan Residence. I looked at my father, whose hand still hovered, paralyzed, over the contract. "Sign the transfer," I said, my voice low and steady, "and then you can tear that up." It was the final piece of the transaction, the symbolic release, the ritualistic destruction of the tool that had defined our relationship. Something inside my father seemed to collapse. The fight went out of his eyes. He exhaled, a long, shuddering breath. The pen came down. The scratch of the nib on the thick, fibrous paper was a deafening roar in the silent room. He signed his name, a messy, jagged signature. Nothing like his usual confident script. He had signed away his kingdom. He slid the document to my mother. She looked at his signature, then at me. There was no hatred in her eyes now, only a profound, bottomless sadness. Acknowledgement. She picked up the pen and signed her name below his, her handwriting as neat and controlled as ever. Then, it was Kara's turn. She was still crying softly. She picked up the pen, not to sign the deed, but to pull the blank letterhead towards her. With a trembling hand, she wrote a single sentence. To the Board of Directors, I hereby resign my position as Chief Experience Officer, effective immediately. She signed her name, pushed the paper towards the center of the table, and then put her face in her hands. It was done. All the conditions had been met. I stood up. I walked around the table to where the signed documents lay. I ignored them. They were for the lawyers. I reached down and picked up the single sheet of paper in the middle, the rent invoice, my final invoice. I held it up between my two hands, and I tore it in half. The sound of the paper ripping was sharp, clean, and final. It was the sound of a chain breaking, the sound of a cage door swinging open. Marcus Sterling, the chairman, who had watched the entire human drama unfold with the stoicism of a judge, finally spoke. His voice was firm, bringing the proceedings to an official close. This meeting is adjourned. The other board members began to stir, gathering their papers with averted eyes, eager to escape the raw, uncomfortable intimacy of what they had just witnessed. My parents and sister remained frozen, prisoners at the table of their own making. I turned and walked towards the door. With each step, I could feel a physical change, a knot of tension in my shoulders that I had carried for so long it felt like a part of my anatomy began to dissolve. The weight of years of silent resentment, of meticulous record-keeping, of being the family's accountant instead of its daughter, simply evaporated. For the first time in my adult life, I felt light. My back was straight. My head was high. I had settled my accounts. I did not wait for my family to leave the boardroom. I had one final piece of business. As the other board members filed out, offering me awkward, wide-eyed glances, I approached Marcus Sterling. He was standing by the window, looking down at the manicured lawns of the corporate park. Chairman, I began. He turned, his expression unreadable. Tess, that was a masterclass in leverage. It was a matter of correcting the records, I said, unwilling to accept the compliment. But it does leave the question of the asset at 14 Juniper Court. I wanted to inform you of my intentions, as it may be of interest to the company. My parents, who had started to gather their things in a stunned, mechanical haze, froze. They looked over, listening, waiting for the final, killing blow. They expected me to announce I was flipping the house for a quick profit, or perhaps moving into the master suite myself. Juniper North LLC, I announced, my voice clear and steady, will be converting the property. It's going to be repurposed as a transitional home for new employees of Rowan Metrics who are relocating to Glenford Springs. We're calling it Homeward House. Sterling's eyebrows rose. A corporate housing unit? Not exactly, I clarified. It will be temporary, a maximum stay of 6 months, a soft landing for people starting their careers here. The rent will be symbolic, $1 per month. My mother made a small, wounded sound, but I continued, my gaze fixed on Sterling. There is, however, one condition for residency. Every occupant will be required to attend a basic financial literacy workshop, held in the living room on Saturday afternoons. Budgeting, saving, understanding debt, the fundamentals. Sterling was quiet for a long moment, processing the information. He looked from me to my parents and then back again. I could see the understanding dawning on his face. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about building something new from the wreckage of the old. You're creating the support system you never had, he said, his voice quiet. I'm creating a better onboarding process for the company's employees, I replied, keeping my tone professional. I finally turned to my parents. Your 60 days begin today. You may stay, rent-free. While you make your arrangements, I expect you to be out by the end of that period. You will leave the keys on the kitchen counter. There was no malice in my voice. It was a simple statement of logistics. I have a repair crew scheduled to begin work this afternoon to address the safety violations. They will replace the faulty wiring, secure the banister, and install new smoke detectors. I trust you won't impede their work." I didn't wait for a response. I collected my briefcase, gave a final nod to the chairman, and walked out of the room, leaving my family in the silent, mahogany tomb they had built for themselves. That afternoon, a work van pulled into the driveway of 14 Juniper Court. I watched from my car parked down the street as the electricians and a handyman got to work. The sounds of drills and hammers echoed from the house, a percussive announcement that a new era had begun. They were fixing the things my parents had neglected, making the house safe for its future, not its past. Later that evening, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from a number I didn't have saved, but I knew who it was. It was Kara. The message was short, stripped of all her usual emojis and exclamation points. "I want to attend the Saturday afternoon class." I stared at the words. It was the first time she had ever asked to learn something from me, the first time she had admitted, in her own way, that she needed help. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I could have been gracious. I could have been encouraging, but this was not about making her feel better. This was about making her understand. My reply was just as direct. "It's at 3 p.m. Bring your old invoices." A week later, I drove to the house. The repair work was finished. Inside, boxes were stacked in the hallways. Ghosts of a life being packed away. My parents were not there. They were leaving in silence, as promised, without drama or confrontation. I walked out onto the front porch, holding a simple rectangular piece of wood. It had been carved and stained by a local craftsman, in clean, elegant letters. It read, "Homeward House." I took down the old, tarnished brass numbers of my childhood, and with a screwdriver, I affixed the new sign to the post beside the front door. A cool autumn breeze swept through the trees, carrying the smell of fresh paint from the newly secured banister. The scent mingled with the ghosts of old memories, the scent of my mother's roses, the scent of charcoal from a summer barbecue. But for the first time, the memories didn't sting. They were just data points from a previous life. As I was about to leave, a small car I didn't recognize pulled into the driveway. A young woman, no older than 23, got out. She was clutching a single, overflowing cardboard box. She looked at the house with wide, nervous eyes, then at me. "Are you Tess?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. She was a junior analyst, newly hired, moving from 3 states away. "I am," I said. I just wanted to say thank you," she stammered, shifting the box in her arms. "I almost couldn't take the job. I couldn't afford the deposit on an apartment and the moving costs. This changes everything for me." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single, newly cut key. I held it out to her. "Welcome to Glenford Springs," I said. "Welcome home." She took the key, her fingers brushing against mine. She looked down at it as if it were a jewel, her eyes shining with unshed tears of gratitude. In her hands, the key was not a symbol of ownership or leverage. It was a symbol of opportunity, a fresh start, and I knew, in that moment, that the house was finally being used for its true purpose. A few weeks later, on a quiet Sunday evening, I found myself drawn back to the house one last time. I didn't go inside. I just stood on the sidewalk across the street, looking at the place that had once been my prison and was now becoming a sanctuary. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden light across the front porch. The new wooden sign, "Homeward House," seemed to glow in the fading light. It looked solid, permanent, real. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A familiar phantom jolt went through me. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. The time was 9:01 p.m., the old hour, the hour of the invoice. But the screen was dark. There was no notification, no request, no digital specter of my old life rising to haunt me. The ritual was broken. The cycle had ended. I slid my thumb across the screen and silenced the ringer for the night. I walked across the street and up the path to the front porch. The new mailbox, installed last week, was a simple, sturdy black box. Engraved on the small metal flag was a single word: community. I reached into my pocket and took out the last key I had for the house, my old front door key. It felt strangely light in my hand. It was no longer the key to my cage, but simply a piece of metal. I opened the slot on the mailbox and dropped it inside. It landed with a soft, final clink. I stood there for a moment, the cool night air on my face. I spoke the words aloud, but only loud enough for myself to hear. A final entry in a ledger that was now closed. From now on, the money paid for this roof will teach people how to stay, not how to love. I turned and walked down the steps, my feet sure on the pavement. The front door clicked shut behind me, a period at the end of a long sentence. The end. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to connect with all of you, so please comment below and let me know where in the world you're listening from. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and consider hitting the hype button to help this story reach more listeners.